Bright is a sustainable homes platform which helps Australians bring the benefits of solar energy into their homes. So welcome to all the panellists. I think we might just start off with a little bit of background on the buy now, pay later regulations. I'm going to throw to Peter first, if you can give us a little bit about how we got here and where we're at in the process.
All right, thank you. Nice to see everyone here for the sexy subject of regulation, so try and stay awake. Sorry, everyone else, it's their passionate about us. Sorry, I shouldn't jest. Look, I think in the first instance, just a small point of clarification. Our industry actually is regulated by many regulators already. So we are subject to regulation from ASIC, AUSTRAC and the Privacy Commission, etc. So what we're actually talking about specifically is regulation of some of the credit products we provide our customers and how some of them may have been exempt from existing regulation. So I think we took a view at inception of where we thought regulation could possibly land. 9 years later, we're probably somewhere close to where we thought, but it's been quite a journey. And you know, from Zip's perspective, and Michael will talk to blocks and afterpost prior to that. But I think there's been lots of different phases, flashpoints, and it's obviously been fairly polarising with some of the commentary from you know, some of the banks, candidly, as you know, editors, and also some of the financial counsellors who mightn't necessarily have understood our products and services. So I think we've been through ASIC reviews, Senate inquiries, even managed to get Larry to wear a tie to the Senate inquiry, so Larry would be the co-founder of Zip, which was quite an achievement. We've had industry codes, we've had heightened levels of reporting during COVID, so the regulator could understand how our products and services impacted individuals during that point in time. But I think I'd summarise the overarching thematic of the last 7 or 8 years in the process to where we are now as one of education. And really providing education to regulators, to government, to external stakeholders about our products and services, what our customers look like, what our revenue models are, what due diligence we undertake on a service, on a customer prior to giving them a product or service to ensure that it's appropriate for them. So uplifting that level of education has been an underlying thematic on the journey, and clearly when Labor came to power in 22, they have mandated further regulation of our industry, and that has been a key priority for them. Others might talk to why it's still taken so long since that point, but since then there has been engagement with Treasury, and we now find ourselves with legislation before Parliament.
Thank you. Michael, did you have anything to add about the process where we're at?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to Peter's comments about education, I think another way of putting that would be to say we've had to do a lot of myth busting over the last couple of years. Both in terms of how our products work, the consumer outcomes that are associated with our products, the value that the products bring to consumers, and in helping with competition. So that myth busting, I think, played a really important role over the last couple of years, and AFIA can talk to some of the work they've done in terms of the economic impact research that we've put out as an industry. And also, I think, to reiterate Peter's comment that we are already regulated, and one of the pieces of regulation that I think is especially important in this context is ASIC's design and distribution obligations. The DDO regime has been in place for a couple of years now. It's applied to all consumer financial services, including buy now, pay later, from inception. And that is a pretty fundamental regulatory framework around ensuring that products are designed with consumers in mind, that providers are distributing their products to the right target market and not allowing consumers for whom the product might not be suitable for to use the product. And ASIC has been very active in enforcing the DDO regime across all financial services, but also including buy now, pay later. And what's especially important, I think, about that regime is the unique powers that ASIC has to issue interim stop orders to prevent providers from continuing distribution of a product where they believe that the provider has not complied with their DDO obligations. And that power was, in fact, used against a buy now, pay later provider a little while ago. So I think this idea that we're not regulated definitely is one of the myths that has to be busted. And in fact, when you look at regulatory frameworks like the DDO regime, I would suggest that actually they go a lot further than even what the new credit regime will do when it finally gets through the Senate. Because it is actually outcomes focused, as opposed to providing sort of a prescriptive level of detail around what you must do to comply. Complying with a prescriptive framework is often easier because you know exactly what you need to do to meet the obligations, whereas outcomes-based, principles-based obligations can often be trickier because they go to not just what you're telling consumers, but actually the way you've designed your product. So I think we as an industry, I think, have done a good job of leaning into regulation, and I think the code of conduct that we put in place a couple of years ago is a great example of the industry coming together as something that was not actually an easy process to do. It was a larger industry back then, and the process of putting together a code when you've got a brand new industry is a bit like herding cats, and the fact that we were able to come together and put together a code, I think, is a testament to the fact that as an industry we were keen to lean in. But might let Rosa talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely, Rosa. Coming from AFIA, you have a little bit of a unique perspective. Can you talk about how you guys...
Absolutely. There are so many different ways in which to approach this, and I think, thank you, Jane, for doing an introduction about AFIA. So we represent the entire finance sector in Australia. Our role is to collaborate with our members and government and various arms of government, key stakeholders, to get good outcomes and influence the way the regulatory framework is shaped in a way that makes sense for how our businesses do their business and customer demand and expectations. I'd like to echo what Peter was saying, and Michael as well. I think education has been a core piece, but also, from my perspective, having good, solid, evidence-based advocacy in our engagement with government. And I might just switch to something that perhaps is a bit more of a relationship kind of conversation, which is, from my perspective, having been in public policy for nearly my whole career, both on the government side and the private sector side and peak. A key piece that I found that I was really proud of, and AFIA really proud of, is, as Michael said, the industry leaning in and not resisting. I think, we all know sometimes we have had this experience where industry is reluctant to get on board with the government agenda or government policy, and offers up resistance, not just in the finance sector, but in other sectors as well. When you immediately resist or try and campaign against an approach and not get on board, it really challenges your relationships. It challenges the ability for you to have a trusted conversation, for you to influence the process, to get a seat at the table. I think in this case, the industry, together with AFIA, has done a tremendous job in leaning in. We knew that the momentum was there for regulation. The Minister was very clear after taking on his portfolio. So the way I saw it in terms of my role working with the industry, and I have to say it feels like one of our AFIA committees here on the stage, is to just try and keep pushing through, working through all the technical challenges. It's been a long couple of years with lots of ups and downs, but yeah, I think the industry is to be commended for leaning in.
Thanks, Rosa. Catherine, I might turn to you now. Michael mentioned before the voluntary code that the industry has been adopting. Can you talk a little bit about how and why that was developed and what the uptake has been?
Sure. I might also speak to just that journey as well. Excuse me. And that'll explain how and why it was developed. But it was interesting. I had some notes given to me with some of the key dates, and I'd totally forgotten that some of these things had happened. Maybe it was so traumatic. But I think it actually started in 2018 when AFIA actually developed the voluntary code for the online small business lenders. And so pre that, there were some successful fintechs, so think Prosper, OnDeck, Moola, and they're in the papers a lot. They were getting a lot of media, regulators, banks and others were really interested in them. And so what happened then was they felt that they didn't have very clear regulations governing them effectively, and they wanted to show that they were creating value, that they were protecting customers, that they weren't creating harm. And so they grouped together with the support of AFIA and actually created a voluntary code. It wasn't the first voluntary code, but in FinTech, effectively it was the one that was the first. And so that happened at the end of about 2018. And it was after that, in 2019, that ASIC actually released its first report into BNPL, Report 600. But I'm going to say that they released their first report because of the success of Peter Gray and Zig Money, and also because of Afterpay, Anthony and Nick. So their companies were so successful, they'd launched, they'd IPO'd, there was a lot of media, and absolutely banks, they were taking market share from banks. Consumer industry groups, legal groups, advocacy groups, politicians were all looking at, what are these companies? How are they regulated? How are they governed? Do they add benefit? Do they create harm? So I think that, with the rise again of fintechs, ASIC released its first report and did, an insight into the industry. The year after, actually, there was a report that was published in February 2019. So I forgot about this one, but it was the Senate Economics Committee, and it was an inquiry into the credit and financial services targeted at Australians at risk of financial hardship. So it was a big mouthful, but it was that report actually that actually had a recommendation that said, recommendation 10, that the buy now, pay later sector develop an industry code of practice. So that was the precedent, and then it was shortly after that actually our companies and also Hum came together as the 4 initial companies that started working with AFIA on creating a code. Rosa, you're absolutely right. It took a couple of years. It was about 2 years of work, and there are a lot of differences in our business models. So mine, for example, is focused solely on financing energy equipment. And so it's very different, to other types of equipment and other types of issues. We also separately had some different regulation that was happening. And so at around this same time, we had the Clean Energy Council actually put a policy out that said BNPL cannot finance solar. And they were effectively putting a ban and said only companies that had a credit licence and credit, licensed products could provide finance for solar. So we separately, outside of this, actually had some separate issues that we were working with together with the ACCC and had a separate code that was also created. But it was, fantastic example of, different parties working together. Because of competition law, it was really important that AFIA, an industry body, was there to be able to support, effectively competitors working together to create something that showed, they stood for unified values, and that they had standards as to how they were going to, support customers in hardship when they didn't pay. How they were going to protect consumers in lots of different ways. And so when the report was released in, it was 2019, 2019, it was a great achievement for the industry, and it was actually published 1st of March, 2021. And so that was the journey. And I think what other companies can kind of take from that journey is, if you're starting to see media, if you're starting to see banks, if you're starting to see consumer groups and government start to pay attention and interest, the best thing you can do is not ignore that. It's really important to work with industry associations and be able to use them to work with your competitors to look at how you can face into those criticisms and how you can face into that attention that you're getting, and not ignore that. Go head on and really start to look at what you can do to show that you have a social licence to exist.
Thanks, Catherine. That was really interesting. I think, hearing about the code and that quite a few of the buy now, pay later operators are already following that, I'm interested to hear about how their implementation of the proposed regulations will impact industry. Peter, I might throw to you initially on this one. How do you think that if it were to pass, how do you think the introduction of the new laws will have a practical effect on Zip or on the industry generally?
Yeah, as Catherine touched on, we all have slightly different business models, but I think my take on it is there'll be minimal impact. I think we have all been in compliant with the industry code already. I think, we all have very customer-centric facing solutions, and I think generally speaking, regulation is there to protect customers, and if you're doing that with the design of your products, there's probably little that's going to be changed other than giving consumers and external stakeholders confidence that all participants are actually adopting the same level. So from Zip's perspective, it really is landing where we probably thought it would, 7 or 8 years ago. as I sort of touched on, so we have been undertaking due diligence, which would include ID, credit and affordability checks at the point of inception for our customers, which was sort of one of the potential impacts for regulation. So we're sort of very supportive where it's landed, and I think it'll actually be a very positive thing more generally for the industry, because I think the constant commentary and noise about the space being unregulated, as we touched on, has been not reasonable, and I think the ability to move forward without that noise, and certainly for me personally, not having to answer at every investor conference I go to will be one less question to take from them.
It almost gives it gives some legitimacy, I guess, and some
100%.
yes, to the sector.
And Rosa, have you found that amongst your members that they have a sort of similar sentiment to what Peter is saying, or are you?
I think from our perspective, industry codes always have a role to play. So they've been part of the financial services system since I can remember. And so whether you call it grey law, soft law, however you like to describe it, it's an important role to sort of fill the gaps and go beyond the law, particularly in places where it can be really challenging for governments to regulate. So in the case of hardship or vulnerability, those sorts of areas, the code can do a lot of heavy lifting to sort of prescribe obligations and how you assist your customers. So I think the code will still have a role to play, and alongside regulation.
Thanks, Rosa. And Michael, how are you finding that getting ready for the possible passing of the regulations at Afterpay? Are you anticipating a big change to how the products run, or can you comment generally on the industry?
Yeah, I think ultimately we're pleased that as part of the process that the government went through in deciding what approach to take, they decided that they would go the middle ground option. They consulted on 3 broad options, and the recognition that buy now pay later is different to traditional credit products and that it requires its own tailored regulatory framework, I think was the most fundamentally important thing to come out of the whole process. And now we're working through the detail. We've got a bill in Parliament. It's sitting in the Senate in a bit of a traffic jam, but we're broadly happy with where things have landed there. There are also regulations that accompany the bill that are yet to be finalised, and we're keen to see that process finalised as well. But generally, yes, I think we're well prepared. We've actually just gone through a process to comply with New Zealand's buy now pay later regulatory framework, which started only a couple of weeks ago, so that's brand new, but it's also the world's first BNPL regulatory framework, so it's another step in the right direction. New Zealand also decided to take a tailored approach to regulating buy now pay later, which is really encouraging, and we're seeing similar signals from the UK. The former government in the UK had started a process to regulate buy now pay later in a tailored way and didn't ultimately get to the finishing line, and the new government is looking to pick up where the former government left off and sort of end up in a similar place, which again is great to see that there's this recognition that notwithstanding that buy now pay later is a form of credit, but that actually does warrant its own tailored and proportionate regulatory framework that's fit for purpose is really critical. And so there might be nuances across the different jurisdictions. And also nuances from the code. Rosa talked about the fact that the code will continue to exist in some form post-regulation, and you see that in other financial services sectors. The bank's obviously well-regulated, but there's a banking code. Insurance companies are well-regulated, but there's an insurance code. So there is a place for codes. But what the code has done actually is help us as an industry, set those minimum standards, and a lot of those minimum standards are now reflected in the regulation that's being formalised through the Parliament as well. So that has been a really useful process for us as an industry to be able to, put together standards that we think are fit for purpose to help, inspire the next round of formal regulation that comes together.
I would echo that, and I've jotted down a few quotes from the Minister actually as part of this process. And so what was very pleasing to me, we obviously a lot of advocacy over the years and evidence-based data with that economic impact report, and it's pleasing to see that then reflected in the explanatory materials and the consultation paper and the Minister's comments. He confirms the value of BNPL and its role in inclusion and in fostering competition and innovation, so really important. regularly citing our evidence that, on average, values are quite low, $132, and that these products deliver benefits to the vast majority of consumers. And so I think it's really been a positive process to engage in that and also have it confirmed.
Catherine, I'm also interested to hear from you on this point, because Bright's products a little bit different perhaps to your usual buy now, pay later, in that you would be targeting slightly different consumers and probably higher loan amounts than other buy now, pay later products. Do you find that the proposed regulations and how they compare to the code is going to work for your customers as well? And I guess do you feel that there's going to be a lot of change at Bright to adopt them?
Thanks, Jane. Bright has a credit licence already, and we already have a separate product in market, which is a Bright Green Loan, and then the separate product that we have is a 0% interest payment plan. So those products both coexist, and they provide different value to different different participants. So we already operate in a regulated environment. Post the changes going through Parliament, they will continue to be separate products. They won't be blended. They will still be very distinct products. The 0% interest product will still be marketed in that way. It will still have different benefits to the merchants who distribute those products. And so I guess that's the first point. Once the regulation's passed, it doesn't remove BNPL. It is a very distinct and separate product that creates value. We do provide higher value credit, and so it can go up to $40,000. The average finance amount's about $8,000. It's usually a 9 kilowatt solar system. Some people are getting solar and a battery, and that's about $14,000. And so our product works because it creates value for the customer, it creates value for the party that's selling the equipment, and it'll continue to do that post-regulation changes. It continues to reduce friction for how that application's taken, how that application's approved, and it continues to provide a great customer experience without providing harm. So, yeah, in the new world, it'll exist, it'll still provide great value, and it'll still be different to the loan product. And the high value items will definitely, there will be different things in place that'll, ensure that new entrants into the market that provide high value items via a BNPL product, are absolutely doing the right thing, and, consumers are protected.
Thanks, Catherine. Peter, I'm going to throw to you now. I'm interested to hear about, reflecting on the process that Buy Now, Pay Later has gone through. As new technologies emerge and new products hit the market for other types of fintechs out there, do you have any sort of words of advice for dealing with regulators or going through this type of process? Any positive or negative learnings that have come out of this process that you could pass on?
Yeah, great question. I guess you're fortunate to be answering some of that question, because we have developed a business that was able to scale. I think in the first instance, when you're establishing a business or trying to scale a business, I think it's really important that you understand the current legislative framework and the current regulations, but also the tone that's coming from the regulators, to try and anticipate any sort of future developments or areas of focus that might be of interest to them, and then build your business around that. That should be your competitive advantage, because the incumbents don't necessarily have the flexibility to deal with some of that change that you might see coming, or they might have legacy systems and be struggling to comply with the existing legislation. So that's actually that understanding and the ability to build a technology solution using the latest technology and data to actually be the beneficiary of that is actually a competitive advantage. And then scale the business. And then if there's conversations or momentum about regulatory change, you've made an impact. So you're in a great position. The learning, I think, at that stage is how you engage proactively to try and control a little bit of the narrative that starts to come from competitive peers or from regulators or for advocates. Use data. You always need to know the data. Part of the process, as Michael and Rosa touched on, our fit-for-purpose regulation in this instance really has been based off significant amounts of data that showed significant benefit and little harm from our products. So know your data, share your data with the regulator. There's actually nothing sinister about doing that. I think 20 years ago, when I was learning some aspects of our industry, you heard the regulator's name, you ran. Michael used to work for. You didn't engage positively or proactively, but I think those days have changed, and I think it's very important that you can actually control some of the messaging by educating them as early as you can. So give them an understanding of what your products are delivering and the benefits, and the minimum standards that you're implementing, and they'll actually start to work with you to address some of the concerns that might come elsewhere. So be as proactive as you can, but be prepared to go on that education pathway that we've all sort of shared.
Thanks, Peter. We've only got a minute or two left. I might just throw quickly to the audience to see if anyone has a question or two for our panel.
Yeah, my name's Tony Thrasses from Frollo. I have a question. I'm not sure if it's about the regulation or about the code, but we did a survey amongst our users at Frollo 22, and we found that 43% of people who used Buy Now, Pay Later also used Pay Advance. And while I'm not a consumer advocate, it was kind of concerning that those two together would create problems. So that's the first question. I have another one. But
Yeah, I think I'll touch on it. I think, part of the interesting aspect of our industry, and certainly our numbers wouldn't be reflective of that higher crossover, but I think to Michael's point that we have landed with a fit-for-purpose regulation that encompasses our products, no interest, very, very low fees. So the average credit score of my customer's business is almost 700. So we actually index all the way to homeowners, home buyers, plus some of the underbanked customers who might be closed out of a bank loan or some other credit alternative. So I think in terms of the solution we offer in the ubiquity, the benefit is significant across all subsets of consumer society. We have some great user case stories about the benefits that we deliver to lower socio, similarly with higher. So we have this significant blend, and I think some of the commentary around we're only for lower socio and we deliver harms has been busted. That myth has been busted and dealt with. So we're not suggesting that we don't have customers who do experience financial hardship. I think any financial services business does. I think there's obligations on us to ensure that we deliver a seamless experience for those impacted individuals, and that's obviously the subject of broader industry commentary as well. But customers who use some of those products that you're referring to are actually shut out of other credit products, but there's still a need for them. So how you deliver that in a consumer-centric or transparent and simple way, with no interest, is part of what we do.
yeah, I guess I was asking, is there anything in the regulation or the code, if you like, that addresses that? I'm not saying there's not a need, or there is this cohort that may need some sort of support, and I guess I was asking what that is.
Yeah.
But
I think, sorry, unfortunately we're out of time. I think they do have back-to-back sessions in here. We might need to sort of take this one offline. But thank you so much for your question. And to wrap up, I just want to thank everyone for coming and listening today. I know, as Peter mentioned at the start, that regulation's not the most exciting thing probably happening at Intersekt this year, but they are important. And also a really big thank you to all of our panellists. So a round of applause.